Let's get started building the tower. Now on page 2 of the cutting guide, the top section lists all the pieces that are needed for the tower. To start with, we only need the 8 side pieces and the 2 base and top pieces. So I've got those laid out here. And then we're also will be needing a strip of Tyvek that is cut 2 1/8 wide by 11 1/8 long. And then of course we'll need a bunch of our cardstock joining strips. Now I have some of mine are cut at 1 inch and scored at a 1/2 inch with 3/8 inch tape, and some are 3/4 inch with 1/4 inch tape. It just was, for a little while I was out of 1/4 inch tape, so I had to prep some that are wider. It shouldn't make any difference what size you cut those joining strips. So that's what a little bit of prep work to get going. For the Tyvek strip, you can either paint the whole thing black on both sides, or the only thing that should show is a strip that about a 1/2 inch strip in the center of the piece of Tyvek and maybe the bottom. So I'll probably just take a Copic marker or something and go down that center 1/2 inch on both sides, because both sides will show, and a little bit on the bottom, and I think that'll be sufficient rather than getting out a lot of paint and dealing with that. So I'll prep that in a minute. And then for the base and the top, we start out, and this is explained on the cutting guide as well, we start out with a 4 1/4 inch square, and it says cut an octagon. I have to make a little correction. For some reason I keep wanting to say a hexagon. This is an 8-sided tower, which is an octagon, so you'll have to pardon me if I sometimes get confused. So anyway, what we want to do is cut an octagon out of this square, and the way we'll do that is we want to have 1 3/4 inch sides. So if you take your centering ruler and center it on one of the sides to start with, and be very careful. I sometimes make an error and I think I'm in the center, but I'm not exactly. So double check that you're in the center. And then we want a 1 3/4 inch side marked here in the center, which is really 7/8 of an inch from 0. So if you start at 0, measure to the left 7/8 of an inch, and to the right 7/8 of an inch, you'll get your 1 3/4 centered, and you can double check that with your ruler. So you want to repeat that around all 4 sides. And right here I can see, just by looking at it, that even though I thought I was being careful, that side wasn't marked correctly. So when I mark it, you mark that 7/8, you can see that you should have 1 inch and a quarter left on each side if you've got it correct. So that's another double check, and I would take a moment and make that double check before you cut things off. So now that you've made those tick marks for the 1 3/4 inch sides here, if we connect the dots to make a triangle cut on each corner, when we make that cut, that diagonal will be 1 3/4 inches as well. You'll want to try to put the tip of your craft knife right where your tick mark meets the edge of the chipboard. The more accurate you are when you make these cuts, more likely you will end up with this diagonal cut here being 1 3/4 inches. So you'll repeat that around all 4 sides. And I've already done that on my second piece, so you'll do this for both pieces. And then we need to cut the piece in half. And what I like to do is just designate one as the top and one as the bottom. It doesn't really matter, but in case the pieces aren't cut exactly the same, this ensures that if you use the 2 pieces marked top at the top, then they will go together, back together correctly. So we're going to connect two opposite corners, and I just get that ruler into that corner and make that cut. And so we'll do that to both pieces, and we'll have that action. Because what's going to happen here is the tower gets hinged on there's two sections to the tower. It gets hinged on this left side so that it can open like this. The back side stays stationary, and the front side opens up with a hinge. So that's what the Tyvek is for over there. So that's the prep to create the top and the base for the tower. And then on the sides, for 5 of the sides we just leave them plain. I'm sorry, for 3 of the sides we leave them plain, and for 5 sides we cut windows in it. And if you refer to template page 2, which is labeled Windows, Tower, and Left House, here on the left side, once I turn it to this orientation, it explains the spacing for the windows on each of these tower sides. And this is not necessarily drawn to scale. It's approximately 3/4 inch scale, but may not be exactly. But it does explain here that you're leaving a 1/4 inch on either side of the windows, and the window opening itself is 1 1/4 inches wide, and then it's 3 1/8 inches up to the bottom of the first opening, and then from there on up it's 2 1/4. So this first window opening is 2 1/4. The distance between the two openings is 2 1/4, and the top window is 2 1/4. So you'll do that, and it says here for 5 tower sections only. We do that because the front tower will have 4 pieces that have windows in it, but the back part of the tower, only one side is exposed. The other sides go into the left part of the main house, so there's no point in cutting windows in those. So 4 of these will go to make the front part of the tower, and these other 4 will go to making the back part of the tower. Our next step is to put the 2 tower wall sections together, and we're working on the inside where there is no score tape as of yet, and we'll just butt join the 4 with windows to make the front section, and when we make the back section, make sure that the window section is on the left when you put these together. And then once you put them together, and I'm just going to use a cardstock joining strip here, there may be some overage in the windows. In fact, there should be, because these are I'm going to use 3/8 inch wides here, and since the window frame is only 1/4 inch, hopefully you can see that there's some overage there that'll have to be trimmed out of the window openings as you go along. So put those sections together, and then we'll be back. Now that I have my front section and my back section joined, we can put on our hinge. And the first thing I want to do is cut a couple of strips of my pattern paper that I'm going to use on the outside of the tower, and I'm going to use, it's called Frightfully Sweet, and I'm using the dark orange side. And so to prep for this, I've cut, for the step we need right now, we need 2 strips at 5/8 inch, but eventually we'll need a third one. So I've cut a total of 3 at 5/8 and 2 at 1/2 inch from one of the 12 by 12 pieces of this paper. And so for 2 of them, I have scored them at 1/4 inch, but we want to do mirror images. So this one that I have here on the left has been scored 1/4 inch in from the right, and the one that I have on my right here is 1/4 inch in on my left. And so then I've prepped on the 3/8 inch side with a piece of score tape on each one. So that's the beginnings of our hinge. Then also on my piece of Tyvek that I painted with a marker down the middle, I prepped that with 2 pieces of 1 inch score tape so that there's an 1/8 inch gap here in the middle with no score tape. If you don't have 1 inch score tape, just load it up with score tape up to 1 inch on each side. Or I think the other really strong tape is like red line tape. You need something very strong for this purpose. So so that's the prep. So let's it's a little tricky at this point to make sure that you get the hinge on the right side. So I've prepped these. I'm looking at the outside right now of each one. On the inside, you may not be able to see this black on black, but here are the cardstock joining strips that I use to butt the sections together. So this is my front, and I'm going to just stand it up here in front of me. And then this is the back. And the windows on the back, remember, are going over on this side. So I would take a pencil or something and just write. The hinge is actually going to go on the outside, so that you put, you know, an H or something on each one, so that now when I put it down to actually work on the hinge, I'll know which section to actually add it to. So with our strips here, the pattern paper is going to go on first. And now that, make sure that your narrow part is at the top here, the wider part of the chipboard is at the bottom. That's when you have it oriented correctly. So the 1/4 inch that we did not add any score tape to on these pattern adjoining strips is going to get added to the edge where we marked our H here. So I'm just going to, and you will put, when you put it on, use that scoring to as an alignment with the edge of the chipboard. So I'm going to do that for each one here. And I'll get the other one. Oops. This is tape that comes off. Got that stuck down, and I'm going to do some burnishing. It's important at all steps here, of course, to burnish anytime you add tape. And then we'll trim off. I'm just going to eyeball this. You can, of course, use a ruler to trim off this excess at the top. Now, the next thing we want to do is add our Tyvek hinge. And when we do that, we want to make sure that this 3/8 inch flap that's here does not get caught up in the hinge business, because what will happen here is this flap that we just, the 3/8 inch edge, when we put this together, there's going to be another piece that comes across here, and that's going to actually hold on to that piece. So the hinge is going to go on the outside, so just kind of tuck that down, make sure it's out of the way, and then using the edge of your the tape that you put here, we're going to add this tie-back hinge to the edge. We've cut this, as you may recall, the tower pieces are 11 3/8 inches tall. We cut the tie-back 11 1/8 inch tall so that we would allow a 1/8 inch gap for the tie-back on both the top and the bottom. So it's obviously going to hang into the windows here a little when we put it on, but we'll just cut that out later. So I'm just looking at it this way to know which side of the hinge is going to go here. It's going to, I'm removing the score tape backing from, if I'm looking at the side without score tape, I'm pulling it off of the right side. So depending on how you want to look at that. And then this, that edge of that tape backing is going to get, we're going to hold it back. I think I'll just put this backing on back on for a second so I can get it started properly. We're going to hold it back 1/8 of an inch from that bottom edge, and then I can see that where the score tape is kind of glistening there, and up here I can see where the backing is, and just kind of put that on, and then you can remove the rest of the backing. Kind of keep the edge of that glistening tape in view and get that hooked on there. And then we'll of course turn it over and give that a good burnish. And then we'll cut out these openings where the tie-back is encroaching on the windows. And I'm going to do that right now just because it's sticky and I don't want to get in my way. So I'm just going to cut that carefully with my craft knife. And I'll remember to come back and hit that edge with a black marker so that I won't see any white when that's happening. So there's the hinge situation that we've got going on right now here. Now I think it's easier to, it will be easier to not attach this side yet, just so, because we need to still make these three-dimensional, but it would probably be easier to figure out where to cut out for the windows on this back side at this point. So if you butt these two sides together, and I've got my little orange hinges out of the way here. If you butt them together and we have it flipped over, could have just started from this orientation. And there will be, this isn't, when the tower goes together, it won't be exactly flush, the two sides. So if you cut the window openings, I would cut them, and then you know, they may end up being just a little bit too big, but I don't think it's going to be too much too big. But I think it'll just be easier to prep and cut them right now just by, I'm going to just take a Sharpie marker here, and I've got my bottom edges aligned. I'm just going to draw. Sometimes this draws fairly well, sometimes, you know, you have to go over it a few times. And then I can cut that tie back out while it's still flat and easy to work with. Now this may not show up on camera, it's very light, but I can see it to do that cutting. So I'm going to do that next, and then I'll be back. So in this step we're going to add the half octagons in order to make our tower sections three-dimensional. In the bottom I'm adding a cardstock joining strip, and when I do this I'm removing the tape backing from one side, and the right angle is facing towards the outside edge. Now don't put it exactly on the edge. Hold it back about 1/16 of an inch. That's the thickness of this chipboard, and that's because the top and the bottom get inset into the sides, so that means that the sides overhang both the top and the bottom. So I'm just eyeballing 1/16 of an inch here. You could you know, obviously take a ruler or take your piece of chipboard and use that as make a line for a guide, and then make sure you burnish that well. Now I don't like to remove a whole lot of little score tape pieces, so I generally we need to cut some little wedges. I think maybe you can see the little wedges here in between each panel, so that it can bend. So I just take the whole tape off first. You know, it's kind of living on the edge a little bit, but that's how I like to do it. And so then to cut those wedges, what we're going to do is just keep your eye on where the join is between two panels, and just cut from the part that's hanging out. We'll just cut a little notch out of there. So just line up the tip of your scissors with the fold in that joining strip and cut little wedges out at each place. And then on each end just cut that back a little bit. I just stick them on my hands so they don't stick back to where I'm cutting. Get them off of my scissors that way. Okay, so now that we've done that, this is one of my sections that I marked with a B. And when I put the section on, what I fold all of these down, and this is where, you know, they could get in your way because they're sticky, but I'm going to just live with it. I'm going to line up this corner with the outside edge of the side wall here. And remember, it's getting inset. I'm going to do that piece just lightly to begin with. These two middle ones are out of my way. And then I'm going to scooch over here and get this corner lined up with the far edge. Now, it should fit pretty well inside of here, but if there's some little gaps, don't worry about it. But mine is fitting fine. So now I'm just reaching on the inside here and securing the joining strip. I know this black and black is a little bit hard to see, but and then I'll go around that inside and give it a super duper good burnish. So I'll do that using one of the T pieces up here at the top, and remember, it again gets inset, and so I'm just folding down, especially the interior sides. Again, lining up that first corner, lightly putting it together, coming around here and getting that final corner putting that together, then coming and getting the two interior edges, and then flipping it over and giving it a good burnish on that inside. So now we're starting to see how this tower is going to come together. The hinge will be over on this side, allowing it to open.